At the dinner table, 1 week after my husband's funeral, my daughter looked at me and said, "Get a job or get out." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her fork down. She said it the way someone comments on the weather. I just nodded. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from." I've learned that grief feels different in every city, every home, every quiet dining room. That night, the house felt larger than its 2,400 square feet. Too large. Too quiet. The mahogany table my husband Daniel had insisted on buying 20 years ago suddenly seemed like it belonged in a museum. Untouched, distant, cold. His chair was still at the head of the table. No one had moved it. A week earlier, that same room had been filled with casseroles, store-bought pies, and neighbors whispering condolences. I remember standing near the china cabinet, thanking people for coming, as if I were hosting a church luncheon instead of burying the man I had loved for 42 years. Now it was just the two of us, my daughter Melissa, and me. The pot roast sat between us, barely touched. The candles had burned unevenly, wax pooling onto the brass holders. Outside, the porch light flickered the way Daniel always meant to fix but never did. "Mom," she said again, softer this time, as if that made it kinder. "You can't just sit around. The mortgage isn't going to pay itself." I folded my napkin carefully. The linen was embroidered with tiny blue forget-me-nots, my wedding gift from my sister back in 1979. I smoothed it once, twice, buying myself a second to breathe. "I've been sitting around for 7 days," I said quietly. "Your father hasn't even been gone that long." She sighed. Not impatient. Just practical. That was the word she liked to use lately. Practical. "You're 68, she continued. "You're healthy. You could work part-time. Or we could sell this place. It's too much house for one person. Too much house." I looked around the dining room. The framed photographs of family vacations to Yellowstone. The grandfather clock ticking steadily against the far wall. The faint scent of Daniel's cologne still clinging to the hallway. Too much house. This was the home we had paid off after 30 years. The place where Melissa took her first steps on the living room rug. Where we measured her height against the pantry door frame in pencil marks that were still there. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply pushed my chair back, stood up, and carried my untouched plate to the sink. Behind me, she added one more sentence. "If you're not going to contribute, Mom, then you need to figure something else out." The faucet ran. The water was warm, steady, predictable, unlike everything else in my life. I dried my hands slowly and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. A widow. Yes, but not helpless. Not yet. That night, I didn't sleep. The house made different sounds after midnight. The refrigerator hummed louder. The heater clicked on and off like it was trying to clear its throat. Every small noise echoed down the hallway that Daniel used to walk through before bed, checking the locks one by one. Melissa had gone upstairs around 10. I heard her pacing for a while. Then silence. I stayed at the kitchen table long after the dishes were done. The overhead light cast a yellow circle over the wood grain. I ran my fingers along a scratch near the edge. Daniel had made it accidentally while assembling a high chair for our first grandchild. I remembered how proud he'd been that day. "You'll never have to worry about this house," he used to say. "It's ours. Free and clear. Free and clear." Those words kept repeating in my mind. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Old habits. Daniel and I had always started our days at 6:30 a.m. coffee first. Then the newspaper. He liked to read the financial section out loud, even when I pretended not to listen. I made coffee for one. Melissa came down around 8. She was already dressed for work, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Mom," she said, grabbing a travel mug. "I wasn't trying to be harsh last night." I nodded. "I just think it's time to be realistic. Property taxes are almost $8,000 a year. Utilities aren't cheap. Maintenance adds up." She spoke like she was presenting numbers in a meeting. "I can help manage things," she continued. "But you need to meet me halfway." Meet me halfway. I had lived in this house for 27 years. I had helped choose the paint colors, planted the maple tree in the backyard, refinished the kitchen cabinets myself one summer when money was tight. Halfway. After she left, I walked slowly through each room. The living room still held the indentation in Daniel's recliner. His reading glasses sat on the side table. I hadn't moved them. Not yet. In our bedroom, his closet door was slightly open. I could still see the navy suit he wore to church every Sunday. A week. It had only been a week. And already the conversation had shifted from grief to contribution, from loss to logistics. I sat down at Daniel's old desk in the den, the same oak desk where he paid every bill by hand, even after online banking became popular. Inside the top drawer were neatly stacked folders labeled in his careful handwriting. Mortgage, insurance, investments. I pulled out the mortgage folder first. Paid in full. 3 years ago. I stared at the document longer than I needed to. The house was free and clear, which meant something else was driving this conversation. I closed the folder gently and rested my hands on the desk. Melissa thought I was sitting around. She thought I didn't understand the numbers. She thought grief had made me smaller. But grief does something else too. It makes you very, very clear about what matters. And for the first time since Daniel passed, I began to feel something other than sadness. I felt alert. Melissa came home earlier than usual that evening. I was in the den again, sitting at Daniel's desk, the folder still resting where I had left it. I'd spent most of the afternoon going through papers. Not because I didn't trust my daughter, but because something no longer felt simple. Mom? She called from the hallway. Are you busy? I closed the drawer before answering. No. She stepped into the den holding her laptop. Not a casserole. Not a photo album. A laptop. I've been looking at listings, she said, sitting across from me. Homes in smaller communities. Active adult neighborhoods. They're easier to maintain. Some even include lawn care. She turned the screen toward me. Smaller houses. 2-bedroom condos. Gated entries. Monthly HOA fees highlighted in bold. You wouldn't have to worry about snow removal, she continued. Or repairs. It would be a fresh start. Fresh start. I looked at the screen but didn't really see it. What about this house? I asked. She hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to notice. We could sell it in this market, she said. It might go for around $520,000. Maybe more. That would give you flexibility. Flexibility. The words sounded polished. Practiced. And the proceeds? I asked gently. Well, she shifted in her seat. We'd split it. I mean, eventually it's mine anyway, right? It just makes sense to plan ahead. There it was. Not grief. Not concern. Planning ahead. I kept my voice steady. Your father and I paid this house off together. I know that, Mom. I'm not taking anything from you. I'm trying to help you. Help. That word again. I studied her face. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't yelling. She truly believed she was being reasonable. That almost hurt more. Melissa, I said quietly, why the rush? She blinked. What do you mean? It's been 8 days. She looked away first. There are things you don't understand, she replied. Expenses. My mortgage. The kids' tuition. Inflation. It's not like when you and Dad were starting out. So now it was about her bills. Her pressure. Her future. I nodded slowly. I see, I said. And I did. This wasn't about whether I could get a job. It wasn't about whether the house was too big. It was about access. Access to equity. Access to cash. Access to something that wasn't hers yet. After she went upstairs, I opened the desk drawer again. This time, I pulled out the insurance folder. Daniel's life insurance policy was neatly stapled. The payout had already been processed. $480,000. Deposited into the joint account. An account that, as of last week, was now mine alone. I closed the folder and leaned back in the chair. Melissa thought I didn't know the numbers, but I knew them very well. And for the first time since the funeral, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about survival. It was about control, and I wasn't ready to hand that over. The next morning, Melissa didn't mention the insurance policy. Of course, she didn't know about it. Daniel had always handled those details quietly, not because he didn't trust her, but because he believed some responsibilities were meant to protect, not to impress. At breakfast, she was scrolling on her phone. I spoke to a realtor, she said casually. Just to get an idea. I stirred my oatmeal slowly. Already. They're offering free evaluations right now. No obligation. No obligation. Everything was happening very quickly for something that was supposed to be about my well-being. What did the realtor say? I asked. That homes in our neighborhood are selling fast, especially ones that are paid off. She looked up at me when she said that part. Buyers like clean titles. Clean titles. I let that sit between us. I haven't agreed to sell, I said. She exhaled, frustrated now. Mom, you don't need all this space. It's just practical. You could move closer to me. The kids barely see you as it is. That part stung. Because I knew it wasn't true. I had been the one picking them up from school twice a week before Daniel got sick. I was the one who helped with homework, who kept spare pajamas in the hall closet in case of sleepovers. But lately, visits had become less frequent. Not because of distance, because of tension. Is this about space? I asked carefully. Or about something else? Her jaw tightened. I don't want you struggling, she said. You don't even have income now. Income. There it was again. As if 42 years of partnership, savings, and planning had disappeared the moment Daniel did. After she left for work, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight came through the front windows, hitting the framed photo of our 25th anniversary. Daniel had his arm around me, both of us laughing at something off camera. We had worked for this house. 2 jobs, each in the early years. No vacations for a decade. Paying extra toward principal whenever we could. I remembered the final mortgage statement. Daniel had brought it home like it was a trophy. Free and clear, he had said again, smiling. Free and clear. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one Melissa rarely touched. Inside was a small fireproof box. Daniel and I kept important documents there. I carried it down to the table and unlocked it. Inside were copies of the deed, the insurance confirmation, bank statements, and something else. A document labeled Transfer on Death Deed. I hadn't looked at it closely before. Now I did. My name. Primary owner. No automatic transfer. No shared claim. No clause giving anyone immediate rights. I closed the folder slowly. Melissa wasn't just thinking ahead. She was assuming. Assuming I would step aside. Assuming grief had made me dependent. But the numbers told a different story. And so did the paperwork. That afternoon, for the first time since Daniel's funeral, I picked up the phone. Not to call a realtor, but to call someone who understood titles better than Melissa ever would. Because if this was going to become about control, I intended to understand every line before anyone else did. The person I called that afternoon was not a realtor. It was Daniel's old attorney, Mr. Whitmore. He had helped us draft our will 15 years ago, when Melissa was still juggling diapers and night classes. Back then, everything felt far away. Retirement, illness, death. Just paperwork adults did to be responsible. Mrs. Carter, he said when he answered. His voice was steady, familiar. I was sorry to hear about Daniel. Thank you, I replied. I have a few questions about the house. There was a brief pause. Of course you do, he said gently. I drove to his office the next morning. It felt strange leaving the house during the day without telling Melissa where I was going. Not because I owed her an explanation, but because something had shifted. For years, we had shared everything openly. Now I found myself moving quietly. Mr. Whitmore's office hadn't changed. Same leather chairs. Same framed degrees on the wall. Same faint smell of old books and coffee. He reviewed the deed first. As it stands, he said, sliding the paper toward me. You are the sole surviving owner. There is no automatic transfer to your daughter. I thought so, I replied. He nodded. Daniel was very clear about that. Those words settled deep. Very clear. What about selling? I asked. You can sell, he said. But only if you choose to. No one can compel you. Not legally. Not legally. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt steady. There's also the life insurance, I added. That was structured to give you liquidity, he explained. Security, not distribution. Security, not distribution. I let that phrase sit in my mind. When I left the office, I didn't rush home. I sat in my car for a few minutes in the parking lot, hands resting on the steering wheel. Melissa had been talking about property taxes, maintenance, being practical, but the truth was simpler. The house wasn't a burden. It was an asset, and assets create options. When I walked back into the house that afternoon, Melissa was already there. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. She must have left work early. I stopped by the realtor's office, she said without greeting. They're eager to meet with us. Us. I set my keys down carefully. I met with someone today too, I said. She looked up quickly. Who? Mr. Whitmore. Her expression changed. Just slightly. What for? To understand my position. Silence filled the room. You don't trust me? She asked. I didn't raise my voice. This isn't about trust, I said calmly. It's about clarity. She crossed her arms. Defensive now. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Maybe. Or maybe I was finally slowing it down. Grief makes people impatient. It makes them want resolution. Movement. Decisions. But Daniel had always told me one thing about money. Never sign anything when you're emotional. I looked at my daughter, my only child. And for the first time since the funeral, I realized something clearly. Melissa wasn't waiting for me to recover. She was waiting for me to comply. And I wasn't ready to do that. The tension didn't explode. It thickened. For the next 2 days, Melissa was unusually attentive. She brought home groceries without being asked. She offered to handle the electric bill. She even suggested we have dinner together instead of eating separately. On the surface, it looked like care. Underneath, it felt like positioning. On the third evening, she placed a folder on the kitchen counter. I printed some numbers, she said, just so we can look at everything logically. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sat down. Inside the folder were spreadsheets. Projected sale price, estimated closing costs, realtor commission, suggested condo options, even a breakdown of what she called equitable distribution. Equitable. She had highlighted one section in yellow. If we sell at $520,000, she began. After fees, we'd clear around $485,000. If you moved into a $275,000 condo, that leaves over $200,000 in liquidity. Liquidity. And that would help you how? I asked gently. She didn't hesitate this time. Well, it would give us flexibility. I could refinance my place. Lower interest rate. Free up cash flow. It benefits everyone. Everyone. I studied her face. She wasn't embarrassed anymore. She was convinced. You said this was about me being secure. I reminded her. It is, she insisted. But we're family. We support each other. Support. I leaned back in my chair. For 42 years, I said quietly, your father and I supported this family. She frowned. That's not what I'm saying. No, I replied calmly. But it's what you're implying. Silence stretched between us. Then she did something new. She pushed a single sheet toward me. A listing agreement. Just meet the realtor, she said. No obligation. Just sign so they can evaluate. There it was. Paper. Signature. Action. I looked down at the line where my name had already been typed neatly at the bottom. Melissa had prepared it in advance. I'm not signing tonight, I said. Her patience cracked. Mom, why are you being so difficult? Difficult. Because I wouldn't transfer control quietly. Because I wouldn't move on command. Because I wouldn't turn grief into a transaction. I met with Mr. Whitmore. I reminded her. Her jaw tightened again. So you're lawyering up against your own daughter? I'm understanding my rights, I corrected softly. She stood up from the table. You think I'm trying to take something from you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked a different question. If Dad were sitting here right now, would you be pushing this hard? That stopped her. For a moment, the confident tone disappeared. But only for a moment. He's not here, she said. No, he wasn't. And that was exactly why she thought the ground had shifted. But what she didn't understand yet was this. The ground had shifted for me too. Grief had taken my husband. It had not taken my judgment. I closed the folder and slid it back across the counter. We'll revisit this, I said calmly. On my timeline. She picked up the papers, frustrated. Upstairs, I heard her door close harder than usual. I stayed at the kitchen table long after she went up. Not angry. Not shaking. Just thinking. This was no longer a conversation about square footage. It was a test. And I had just refused the first draft. The house felt different after that night. Not louder. Quieter. Melissa stopped bringing up the realtor directly. She stopped pushing papers across the table. On the surface, things looked calmer. But I started noticing small changes. On Saturday morning, I went to log into our joint checking account, the one Daniel and I had used for everyday expenses. The password didn't work. I tried again. Still nothing. At first, I assumed I had mistyped it. My hands have been a little unsteady lately. Grief does that. So I reset it. When the confirmation email arrived, it didn't come to my inbox. It went to Melissa's. I stared at the screen. That account had always been tied to both of us. Daniel and me. Not her. When she came downstairs, I asked casually, did you update the banking notifications? She didn't look surprised. I consolidated things, she said. It's easier if I manage the bills for now. For now. I repeated. You've been through a lot, she added. I figured I'd take the pressure off. Pressure. There was that word again. I'm capable of paying my own bills, I said evenly. I know you are, she replied quickly. I'm just trying to help. Help. But help doesn't quietly reroute access. Help doesn't move financial alerts without a conversation. That afternoon, I drove back to the bank. Not because I was panicking, because I was confirming. The banker reviewed the account settings. Melissa had added herself as a primary online administrator years ago when Daniel was in the hospital for surgery. At the time, it made sense. Now, it created leverage. You can separate the accounts, the banker told me. Open one in your name only. Transfer funds. Will she be notified? I asked. Yes. I thought about that. Grief had made Melissa move fast. But speed works both ways. I'd like to open a new account, I said calmly. We transferred the life insurance funds into the new account under my name only. Not hidden. Not secret. Documented. Legal. When I got home, Melissa was sitting at the kitchen counter with her laptop open. She looked up immediately. Did you move money? She asked. So she had received the notification. Yes, I said simply. Her expression hardened. Why would you do that without telling me? I held her gaze. Why would you change the login settings without telling me? Silence. For a second, we just looked at each other. This wasn't about disrespect anymore. It was about positioning. You think I'm trying to take advantage of you, she said quietly. I think you're moving very quickly, I replied. She closed her laptop slowly. If you don't trust me, she said, maybe I shouldn't be here. That sentence lingered in the air. Maybe I shouldn't be here. Until now, she had been suggesting I leave. Suddenly, the idea shifted. I didn't react. I didn't threaten. I simply said, we both need clarity. She went upstairs again. And for the first time since Daniel passed, the house didn't feel like it was slipping away from me. It felt steadier. Because now, the lines were visible. And once lines are visible, you can decide which side you're standing on. The next morning, Melissa didn't apologize. She didn't bring up the deed either. Instead, she started moving things. Not furniture. Authority. When I came downstairs, I found a stack of papers neatly arranged on the kitchen island. Utility bills. Insurance statements. Property tax records. Highlighted. Organized. Presented. I made a binder, she said, almost cheerfully, so we can see the full picture. I sat down. She had divided everything into tabs. Expenses. Maintenance. Future costs. Long-term care estimates. Long-term care. That's premature, I said calmly. It's realistic, she replied. Eric wasn't there this time. This was just her. Mom, do you know what assisted living costs around here? She asked. I'm not moving into assisted living. I'm not saying now, she insisted. But planning matters. Planning. That word again. She flipped to another page. If we restructure assets now, it protects everything from being eaten up later. Restructure. Protect. Every word sounded responsible. But every solution required one thing, my signature. I spoke to someone else too, she continued. A financial planner from church. He said transferring partial ownership early prevents future complications. I looked at her carefully. So you've been consulting people, I said. Yes, she answered, almost defensively. Because you won't make decisions. That landed differently. Won't make decisions. Or won't make the ones she wants. I am making decisions, I said evenly. You just don't like them. Silence. She exhaled sharply. Why are you acting like I'm against you? I'm not acting, I replied. I'm observing. I stood up and walked to the sink, giving myself space before continuing. When your father was alive, I said, no one questioned our financial choices. That's different. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was obvious. Daniel had represented authority. His absence created opportunity. I'm not Dad, I said quietly. But I am not incapable. She crossed her arms. You're making this emotional. No, I corrected. I'm keeping it intentional. That stopped her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something new. If you won't cooperate, I can't stay here indefinitely. There it was again. A subtle shift. From pressuring me to leave, to positioning herself as temporary. I turned toward her fully. This house isn't temporary for me, I said calmly. Her eyes flickered. You're choosing property over family. No, I said softly. I'm choosing boundaries. She shook her head and gathered the binder. You're going to regret dragging this out. Maybe, but regret is easier to live with than surrender. After she left the kitchen, I sat back down and opened the top drawer of Daniel's desk again. The unsigned deed was still there, untouched. I ran my fingers across the edge of the paper. They believed time would wear me down. That grief would exhaust me. That pressure would make me compliant. But something they hadn't calculated was this. The more they pushed, the clearer I became. And clarity, once it settles in, doesn't negotiate under urgency. 3 days later, I invited Melissa to come with me to Mr. Whitmore's office. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply said, if we're going to keep discussing paperwork, let's do it properly. She hesitated, but agreed. Eric couldn't make it that afternoon. For once, it was just the two of us in the car. The drive felt longer than usual, even though the office was only 15 minutes away. Neither of us turned on the radio. When we sat down across from Mr. Whitmore, Melissa looked composed. Confident, even. I just want clarity, she began. I'm trying to help my mom protect her assets. Mr. Whitmore nodded politely. Of course, he said. That's always wise. Then he turned to me. Mrs. Carter, would you like me to explain your current position? Yes, I replied. He folded his hands on the desk. As it stands, you are sole legal owner of the property. No co-owner. No lien. No automatic transfer clause. Any modification requires your voluntary signature. Melissa shifted slightly in her chair. That's why we're here, she said. To explore modification. Mr. Whitmore didn't argue. Instead, he asked a simple question. Mrs. Carter, is there a reason you wish to transfer ownership at this time? I answered clearly. No. Silence. Then he continued. In that case, I would advise against any immediate change, particularly so soon after a major life event. Financial decisions made under emotional strain are often revisited later. Melissa's voice sharpened. So you're saying she shouldn't plan ahead? I'm saying, he replied calmly, that planning ahead does not require surrendering control. That landed. I saw it in her expression. She had expected resistance from me, not from a professional. There are other instruments available, he added. For example, a revocable living trust that would maintain Mrs. Carter's control while outlining future distribution clearly. Melissa blinked. Meaning what? She asked. Meaning, he said gently, that inheritance can be structured without changing ownership today. Inheritance. There it was. Spoken plainly. Not disguised as maintenance. Not wrapped in practicality. Inheritance. Melissa looked at me. For the first time since this started, she didn't look strategic. She looked uncertain. You already thought about that? She asked. I held her gaze. Your father and I planned carefully. Mr. Whitmore slid a document across the desk. A draft trust outline. Primary beneficiary, Melissa, but only upon my passing. Not before. No partial deed. No accelerated transfer. No early access. Your mother remains fully in control, he explained. This simply ensures clarity later. Melissa stared at the paper. No immediate equity. No shared title. No leverage. Just patience. I don't understand why this has to feel like a battle, she said quietly. It doesn't, I replied calmly. Unless someone is rushing. We left the office without signing anything that day. But something had shifted. The conversation was no longer about me being incapable. It was now documented that I was informed. Protected. Advised. When we pulled into the driveway, Melissa didn't get out immediately. So that's it, she asked. You're locking everything down? I looked at the house. The maple tree in the yard. Daniel's old truck still parked along the side. I'm stabilizing it, I said softly. Because stability feels threatening. Only to people who expected movement. After the meeting with Mr. Whitmore, the house felt different again. Not tense. Defined. Melissa stopped mentioning the deed. She stopped talking about adding her name. She even stopped using the word practical. But something else replaced it. Distance. We moved around each other carefully for the next few days. Polite. Controlled. Measured. On Thursday evening, she stood in the doorway of the den while I was reviewing the trust draft. So you're really doing this, she said. Yes, I replied. You don't think that sends a message? I looked up at her. It does, I said calmly. It says I'm thinking long term. She stepped into the room. It says you don't trust me. I closed the folder gently. No, I corrected. It says I don't rush under pressure. That silenced her. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You've changed, she said. I almost smiled at that. Of course I have, I answered. Your father died. Grief changes you. It strips away hesitation. It sharpens edges you didn't know were dull. I just don't understand why you won't let me help, she said quietly. I chose my words carefully. Help doesn't require ownership. She looked at the desk, at the paperwork, at the order. For weeks, she had been steering the conversation, initiating, proposing, pressuring. Now the structure was formal, documented, and outside her control. I talked to Eric, she said finally. He thinks this is going to create resentment. Resentment from who? I asked gently. She didn't answer. Because resentment only builds when expectations aren't met. And her expectation had been access. The next morning, I finalized the trust with Mr. Whitmore. Revocable. Clear. Transparent. Upon my passing, Melissa inherits the property and remaining assets. Until then, full authority remains with me. No ambiguity. No shared title. No acceleration clause. When I came home, I placed a copy of the trust on the kitchen counter. Not dramatically. Not as a warning. Simply as information. Melissa found it an hour later. She read it in silence. So I get everything, she said slowly. Eventually. Yes, I replied. But not now. No, the room was quiet. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, there were no proposals on the table. No spreadsheets. No printed deeds. Just clarity. I didn't think you'd push back like this, she admitted. I met her eyes steadily. You didn't think you needed to push. That was the shift. Before, she assumed. Now, she understood. Control hadn't disappeared with my husband. It had simply changed hands. And I was still holding it. Not out of spite. Not out of pride. But because stability, once reestablished, is not something you surrender twice. After the trust was finalized, the house became quieter than it had ever been. Not hostile. Not explosive. Just distant. Melissa stopped bringing home spreadsheets. She stopped suggesting meetings. She stopped saying words like restructure or protect. Instead, she started coming home later. Dinner became separate again. One evening, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. You're quiet, I said gently. She didn't look up right away. I didn't realize you thought I was trying to take something from you, she said. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. I don't think you woke up one day planning to take advantage of me, I answered calmly. Then what do you think? She asked. I took a moment before replying. I think you saw vulnerability, I said. And you reacted to it. Her eyes lifted slowly. You think I saw you as weak? I think you saw an opening. The words weren't angry. They were honest. She looked down at her hands. When Dad died, she said quietly, everything felt unstable. My mortgage, the kids' tuition, inflation. I kept thinking, what if something happens to you too? What if everything gets tied up? So that was part of it. Fear. Not just greed. Fear of uncertainty. I understand planning, I said softly. Your father and I planned our entire lives. Then why does it feel like you shut me out? She asked. Because planning and control are not the same thing. That sat between us. I was trying to secure the future, she said. And I was securing the present, I replied. Silence again. This time, it wasn't sharp. It was reflective. A few days later, Melissa told me she and Eric had decided to move back to their own place full-time. I think space might be better, she said. I nodded. There was no dramatic goodbye. No slammed doors. Just boxes quietly packed. On her last night staying here regularly, she paused in the hallway near Daniel's old recliner. I didn't mean to make you feel disposable, she said. Disposable. That was the word I hadn't said out loud. But she had felt it. I'm not disposable, I replied gently. And I'm not an obstacle either. She nodded slowly. I guess I forgot that you and Dad built all this before I was even thinking about mortgages. Yes, I said. We did. When she left the next morning, the house felt large again. But not fragile. Stable. I walked into the den and sat at Daniel's desk. The trust papers were filed away. The accounts were organized. The lines were clear. Melissa would inherit everything one day. But not because she pushed. Because we planned. Grief had revealed something uncomfortable. Not that my daughter was cruel, but that pressure exposes priorities. And when she thought I was vulnerable, she reached for control. Now she understood something different. I may be a widow, but I am not without structure, not without foresight, and certainly not without agency. It has been a little over a month since Daniel passed. The house no longer feels like it's holding its breath. The maple tree in the front yard has started shedding early leaves. Autumn is coming. Seasons move whether we are ready or not. Melissa and Eric are back in their own home now. The grandchildren visit on Sundays again. Not out of obligation. Out of routine. Last week, Melissa stood in the kitchen beside me while I was making coffee. No spreadsheets. No folders. Just 2 mugs and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I was scared, she said suddenly. I didn't pretend not to understand. Of losing the house. I asked. Of losing stability, she replied. Dad was always solid. And when he was gone, everything felt like it could fall apart. I nodded. He was solid, I agreed. But so am I. That's what she hadn't seen at first. She thought stability left with him. She thought control had evaporated. She thought I needed direction. What I needed was time. Time to grieve. Time to think. Time to decide without being hurried towards someone else's comfort. Yesterday, I walked through every room again. The living room where Daniel used to nap on Sunday afternoons. The hallway with the pencil marks measuring Melissa's height. The kitchen where that sentence was first spoken. Get a job or get out. I can still hear it, but it doesn't sting the same way anymore. Because now I understand what it really meant. It wasn't cruelty. It was fear speaking too loudly. The trust is in place. The accounts are secure. The deed remains exactly where it belongs. Nothing dramatic happened in the end. No shouting. No permanent estrangement. Just clarity. Melissa knows she will inherit everything one day. But she also knows something more important now. Inheritance is not access. And love is not leverage. This house is not just square footage or equity. It is memory. It is partnership. It is 42 years of quiet discipline and shared sacrifice. And I am not a placeholder standing between my daughter and her future. I am the reason that future exists. Sometimes, when I sit at the kitchen table in the early morning light, I think about how quickly people mistake grief for weakness. They see tears and assume confusion. They see silence and assume surrender. But grief does something powerful. It reminds you exactly what you built, and exactly what you're not willing to hand over under pressure. I did not get a job. I did not get out. I stayed. Not because I was stubborn, but because I was steady. And steady, I've learned, is something you earn long before anyone tries to test it.